Hey, what's up? I'm Guy.
I'm John.
It's our YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. Give this video a like.
Podcast below in the description as well. Check it out.
This video brought to you by our friends at wineaccess.com/ham, where you get 20% off.
Yep, 20% off, wineaccess.com/ham. Use it today, people.
Let's talk about John Lynch, what he said about Reuben Foster, a lesson learned. He said this to Bucky Brooks, right?
Yeah.
I've got the quote here, John. I'll read it. I don't say anything is a mistake, but I had so much belief in Reuben Foster and my ability to get him. Okay, he's got some issues. I can help this young man out. I can be the one. I'm not playing anymore. I'm in the GM seat. I can put resources around him, all those things. But I think probably I've learned some tough lessons that's going to be hard to have that kind of influence and have that kind of connection because I'm not his teammate anymore. I'm actually in a different role. Reuben's a fine young man, went through some tough things. I didn't need to put him out there like that. But that's an instance where I probably, my experience, feeling like, you know what, I can get to him. Sometimes you can't. Or you can't make a situation better because of the dynamics involved.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was as revealing and as open of a conversation about a player as you'll hear from a general manager. Because for the most part, GMs have no problem talking about a guy they hit on and describe him as years go on and what they loved about him and just describe how well he's fit in and everything he brought to the table. Or about a great player that they loved in a draft they ended up not taking, but it helped, like, you know, kind of draw up the way that they run their draft, and they have new processes because of, you know, we love DK, but we overthought it.
Drafted ahead before they could get Patrick Mahomes. Oh, we couldn't get him.
Yeah, stuff like that. You rarely hear guys just openly talk about a miss. And it's a little unique because most general managers, if they didn't play in the NFL, would have to describe, like, why the guy, what went wrong with the player. He can use the angle as a former player, like I could mentor him as a human being.
Yeah.
And so it's an easier thing technically to be able to do, but it was revealing. And he realized, like, I'm not trying to shit on the guy, but it was a disaster, right? An utter disaster for the 49ers. One, because of how candid they are. I think both those two combined are consistently the best quotes in the NFL. I think Mayock is a fantastic quote too. He just doesn't talk that much, and the Raiders just haven't been, like, he really only talks around draft times, but whenever he speaks, he's just very open. Most coaches and GMs are not very open. Part of this is go back to when they drafted him. He said we would have taken him number 3 overall.
Yeah.
He said that. He was the 3rd guy on their draft board, and he was a fantastic player. And I just remember people that had been going into Alabama for a decade plus saying, like, we just don't trust the situation. We had taken him off the draft board. And they all acknowledged he was probably like a top 10 talent in that draft. But whether it was his maturity, the whole package, right? Injuries, they took him off draft boards. And I think that he could acknowledge this. You just don't hear that very often. And I do think this gets back to the way I live my life, and I was taught at Cal Poly, like, you learn by doing. Going into that would be something that I'm sure other GMs would have told them, like, yeah, we had this mistake before. We know you can't do that. You have to know guys. You can't hold their hand. If you don't have, like, you didn't have any other linebackers in that unit that could have held his hand. Like, John, you're viewing yourself as, like, the team captain, and, like, John, you know, basically laid it out right there. I'm not his teammate. I'm in a fucking desk upstairs, you know, in a polo shirt. He doesn't look at me like I'm in the Hall of Fame now, but he doesn't. Reuben might not even know that, right?
He doesn't look at me that way, and I just don't have the access to him to become a member of his inner circle, right? You want to become his buddy and quote unquote hold his hand, help him out. You're going to his house. You're inviting him to dinner. You're doing whatever. You're going out with him on a Saturday night. Maybe there's a situation that he's in, and you're the voice of reason in that spot. Well, if you're the GM, what John Lynch can't be like, Kyle, part of my job, make sure Reuben stays on the straight and narrow. I'm going to go out with him every Saturday night. He goes out of club Friday, I'm there. Like, GM doesn't get to do that, right? Teammate can do that. It'd be kind of weird if John Lynch is like, I'm just going out. Hey, honey, want to make sure we hit this Reuben pick, so I'm going to go out with him. He goes out Friday, I'm going. He goes out Saturday, I'm going. Just part of the gig. It doesn't work like that as a GM. I think what he's saying is I realize the limitations of my role. Like, there are just limitations to being the general manager. There are limitations to not being in the locker room or not being a teammate anymore. And some of those limitations are you don't Now a coach, I guess, can control what a guy does on the field to some degree, how you put a player in position to succeed.
You have much more control to me as a position coach than you would as John Lynch.
Off the field, you're saying.
Yeah, I
You
just think you
spending
can
all kinds of time with them.
I just think your relationship, you become closer with him than John would.
About
John
John's
wouldn't
job,
become that
too.
close with him.
Just he has other things. There are just other responsibilities he has. He can't make Reuben Foster his number one priority. He can't. It's just you get too many things to juggle.
Well, I would imagine this. Kyle Shanahan has a guy that he looks for, and it is the opposite of everything Reuben Foster. Right. And John Lynch, I think, brought in a different perspective because he played with Warren Sapp. And Warren Sapp, was a very questionable individual off the field. But he was an elite player. I would imagine if you were really drinking beers with John, he'd be like, I saw some Warren in Reuben. And what happened to Warren? He got around John Lynch. He got around Derek Brooks. He got around the Barber. He got around Tony Dungy. Like we just had I always could remember. Yeah, I guess Tiki was the running back. And we helped it out, and it worked together. But like John's saying, like you can't – I'd honestly just – you have to also learn once you go through something like that, like, the risk reward, it's got to be the perfect situation. If we have any reservations, it's not even worth messing with a guy like that.
Also,
the Antonio Browns, the Reuben Fosters, like I maybe I forwarded this to you. I think I put it on Instagram. Watching the Colts, they do the best draft show by far. They just put it on YouTube, like lead up to the draft. And Frank Reich was I think I've talked about it on the podcast before, was in the draft room, and they were just going over guys. And Frank was like, and they were arguing like, I don't think this guy fits my team. And the other guy's like, this guy's good enough to help us out. And Frank was just, hold up, guys. I have no problem as the head coach taking a risk. I have no problem taking a risk if the guy's a great player. But look at this draft board. There are enough, maybe not great, he said, but just really good players who are really good people. And then we got a handful of really good players who are questionable people. Why don't we just take the really good players who are good people and not worry about these guys? Right? Just avoid them if we can. And it's pretty easy too, Well,
that's part of the thing here, right? Is okay. It's not there's a difference between a free agent and a first round pick in terms of how much when you take on. Let's just continue. With
even a
Foster.
6th or 7th round pick.
Yeah,
right.
There's a risk that you take on, but when you make it a first round pick, that significantly elevates the level of risk because it's an opportunity cost. Right, and they traded up, yeah. So they put a lot of capital into it. And John Lynch is saying it's because I thought I could help him.
Yeah.
Because I thought I could help. Not even to talk about, by the way, that he had physical issues, right? He was a physical risk, too. He got hurt a lot.
That is a draft. I think it's fair to say.
It was a double risk, John.
Their first-round pick, that draft, could have really derailed the relationship between John and Kyle because it was pretty clear John was really tight with Solomon Thomas and was the lead dog on that one. Now, I'm not saying Kyle didn't like him, but John was his biggest fan, right, as a human being. Loved him. And Reuben was clear John was driving that bus. So just those first 2 years when they were not winning, I think if John – and this goes back to – I forward you another thing that John – he just did the media rounds and he talked about how him and Kyle's relationship just kind of fell together, right? That if Kyle would have ended up hiring, the arranged marriage that Jed wanted him to do with General Patton, and I think Ballard was already hired, but those type guys. Yeah, Fitterer, the guy that's now the GM for the Panthers, I think was in the mix from Seattle, Schneider's guy, if I remember correctly. But just guys like that ended up becoming GMs. And are well thought of. The Patton guy, or George Payton, I just call him Patton, I think is very well thought of. People think he's like a Chris Ballard level guy. I think it's George Payton, even though it's got 2 T's.
Patton?
Yeah.
That's
but the point is that Kyle had told John, I'm not comfortable in this situation. I think if he gets one of those guys and they do – now, I'm not saying they would have drafted those guys because they had much more experience, right? They bring a different skill set to the table, both those two guys being in personnel for decades, probably 2 decades plus, both of them. But if they had taken the same players – and Kyle had just had your normal up-and-coming like John Schneider, whoever it is, right? Just the GM they had forced on him, or that he had kind of just given into, I do wonder if it fractures and is a disaster. The John Lynch is just easier to kind of get around the mistake and figure it out together.
Yeah.
You agree there?
Yeah, I do. And I think John Lynch is probably, I don't want to say he's more, maybe those guys would have had the same reaction. I think it's easy. I don't think we should ever forget that, like, John Lynch played for Mike Shanahan. John Lynch played for Kyle Shanahan's dad when Kyle was a kid. Like, the level of respect on just a basic level
College,
he has to have,
late high school, college.
But you understand what I'm saying? Like, the level of respect that Kyle has to have for John Lynch, that nothing could probably change. That base level of respect is just really high. And then, and again, maybe Gutekunst or Fitterer would have been just as comfortable in their own skin as John.
Probably hard for that to be the case.
I would imagine John, long before he said what he said to Bucky Brooks, behind the scenes said, I learned my lesson on that one. Right? Yeah. I learned what he just said to Bucky. I'm sure it's been very clear. Kyle, I was wrong about that. Right?
I do think you have to go through things in any profession to truly learn. Like, it's one thing to go, like, we saw what happened with Mayock and Gruden and Antonio Brown. That would never happen to us. And then it gets presented to you, right? The same similar situation. Like, hey, man, you can trade for Jalen Ramsey in 2 years. Like, him and McVay, he shoved McVay to the ground. He's losing his mind. He's still the best corner of the league. And you're like, we can get him for a third? Let's do it. And then 2 days later, he's fighting your coach. You know, and then you go through the situation.
If it had been reversed and Washington football team, let's say, had traded up and drafted Reuben Foster, and the exact same thing that happened with the Niners happened in Washington, the Niners would have signed him, because what did John Lynch would have been thinking? That wouldn't have happened if he was here with me.
I can fix him.
Yeah. And if Reuben Foster had never become a Niner, he'd be thinking, man, if only we had him, the one that got away, I could have made that work.
I just think that most fans and probably most of us on the outside views these guys like a situation that happens in the NFL or the NBA or any sport that the whole league learns from that situation. I don't think that's true most of the time. I think you truly learn from what happens in your building, and the others you see, but you can always talk yourself out of it or around it for yourself, just because we truly care. Yeah, like I think the Warriors, for example, like they had some disastrous picks, but then they found this Jordan Poole thing, and all of a sudden they're like, God, they got something. But they're learning from Wiseman, that they're going to learn through their own mistakes, and Bob Myers. You can't learn through other teams. You have to do it yourself, good and bad. And just the nature of the NFL, of drafting human beings and the amount of guys you have to in a given draft, you're going to have, ideally, a true disaster can only happen probably really high in the draft, probably a first or second round pick. I guess it could be a disaster late round pick if the guy does something really bad off the field, because you are rubber stamping him when you bring him into your building.
Right.
So but you have to learn now. They got 4 years of picks. They've maneuvered up and down. Like, they have a pretty long, just kind of Rolodex of information to themselves of what works and free agents and doesn't in their own head.
Let's include a quick YouTube comment into this conversation from Ricardo. Do you guys think the Niners will be scared to draft an Alabama player since Reuben Foster might have played a factor in not drafting Mac Jones? I don't think so. I think a lot of Alabama guys turn out to be really high-level guys, right? Like guys you'd want in your organization, hard workers. So I don't think that would change that.
And I think coming out of Alabama, Reuben, universal, like everyone had the same opinion on him. Now, John's opinion was I could save it, but he knew what he was getting. It's not like Saban was like, it's bullshit everything you read. Because remember, he got kicked out of the combine?
Yeah.
Remember, he attacked
at the hospital
because he was tired of waiting in line, which, listen, I'm impatient too. I was like, but it was clearly with him, I think, around the league, like drip. Of course it was Reuben Foster. It was one of those. Of course it was him. And that was something now that would be, I would imagine, a major turnoff to Lynch, where at the time, like, I just think it didn't bother him. And you only truly know till that phone call that he got, really the one time that he got arrested the first time, but to me on the road trip, when it's like, hey, John, Reuben's been arrested, like that scars you for life.
When he was on a zero tolerance, type
here
situation.
would be the pushback. Can you still have like a honey badger moment? Like, are you out on all these guys completely? Because now you could argue that Honey Badger is an all-time outlier. Like, he went from a guy kicked out of LSU to being like, is he going to go to the Hall of Fame and like the highest character guy in the league? Everyone loves him. He's like a team captain for 3 different teams. He's the outlier on the opposite side. But there are a lot of guys in the middle. People with questionable pass, questionable, like Marcus Peters is a guy that kicked out of school. He's bounced around a little in the NFL, but
John,
he's played for really good teams and done a good job.
I remember after he'd been kicked out of school, I was in Seattle, drove by the stadium. Maybe I was doing a basketball game, or that probably wouldn't line up. I don't know. I was there for something.
And their pro day, right?
They had, yeah. So maybe it wasn't baseball. I don't know. But they had a sign outside their stadium that had Marcus Peters on it, as well as somebody else, just like kind of a good luck in the NFL type situation. I think he did come back for their pro day. Like he and Pete got on the same page. Were you there? Or was after you were out of the league? But
that was after. But I remember it happening.
But he went back. Yeah, like Chris Peterson, whatever, they mended fences and he was back. That was significant. So,
yeah.
That's a good example.